inside each of us. There is a silent world in motion, deeper than our daytime worries, wider than our conscious thoughts. Carl Jung called it. The unconscious is the true psychological reality. It is the place where forgotten memories rest, where unspoken dreams wait to be acknowledged, and where a strength you have never touched lies hidden. If you feel tired, lost, or as if life is pushing you forward instead of you walking by your own will, then this is the doorway you are meant to open. This 1-hour video will not only help you sleep more deeply, it will help you awaken the strongest part of yourself. You will understand why you react the way you do, why you repeat patterns that once hurt you, and why nameless emotions quietly shape the direction of your life. Through Jung's insight, you will see that what lies within you is not chaos, but a map waiting to be read correctly. Let this voice guide you through the gentle darkness of your mind, where every question becomes clear. The next hour will be a journey home, back to yourself, back to stillness, and back to a strength you have forgotten for far too long. Take a deep breath and let us begin. Part 1. The unconscious and the two-layer model. When Carl Gustav Jung looked into the inner world of a human being, he did not see a chaotic storage of repressed memories as Freud once described. He saw something larger, deeper, and far more ancient. Jung saw a living kingdom, an inner spiritual ecosystem operating quietly yet powerfully, where personal memories merge with the shared patterns of all humanity. And from the heart of this kingdom, images, symbols, intuitions, and dreams constantly rise up, trying to communicate with our conscious self. Jung once wrote in the collected works, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." This was the foundation of his worldview. The unconscious is not an enemy, it is a guide. Jung divided the unconscious into 2 layers, a bold discovery that transformed the entire field of psychology. The first layer is the personal unconscious, containing forgotten memories, emotions that were never allowed to surface, wounds buried beneath the dust of time, and dreams pushed aside because they were deemed unrealistic. They are still there, living quietly, waiting patiently. They speak through dreams, through intuition, through vague uneasiness we cannot explain, through the emotional outbursts we cannot control. But to Jung, this layer was only the surface. He discovered another layer, deeper and more ancient, a realm scientific thinking of his time did not dare touch the collective unconscious. Here, memories are no longer individual, but belong to the entire human species. Jung called these primal structures archetypes, the original patterns that have lived in the human psyche since antiquity. In the archetypes and the collective unconscious, Jung wrote, "Archetypes are the living system of reactions and aptitudes that determine the individual's life in invisible ways. They are the frameworks of humanity's great stories, the great mother who nurtures and destroys, the hero who confronts darkness and returns transformed, the old wise man who guides us through trials, the divine child who carries the seed of renewal. These archetypes are not mere cultural symbols. They are the deepest language the unconscious uses to speak to us." From this perspective, Jung shattered the misconception that the unconscious is merely a trash heap of memories. He insisted that the unconscious is a living system, an intelligent network, constantly striving for psychological balance. When the ego becomes stubborn, chasing success, ambition, or deviating from its true nature, the unconscious pushes back with opposing images, sometimes strange dreams, sometimes repressed emotions, sometimes physical symptoms. Jung called this the principle of compensation. The unconscious corrects us wherever the conscious self has gone astray. We often believe we direct our lives by rational choice. But Jung pointed out a profound truth. Many of our reactions, decisions, and emotions originate from the unconscious. He once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The unconscious does not wish to control us. It only wants to be heard. And if we ignore it, it will send increasingly stronger messages, recurring dreams, vague anxieties, unexplained restlessness, repeated relationship patterns, or the feeling that someone else is steering my life, even though no one is there. That hidden driver is the submerged part of the psyche. In this two-layer model, Jung described the unconscious as an underground river, where millions of years of humanity's spiritual history merge into a single current. When a symbol or dream rises to the surface, it is not merely personal, it is the river speaking. Sometimes it appears as an old room you have never seen, sometimes as a mysterious woman, a silent child, or a dark mountain path. These images do not come from your private memory. They come from humanity's memory. When someone dreams of being chased, abandoned, or searching for something lost, they tap into patterns known to ancient Sumerians, Egyptian priests, Greek warriors, and Indian mystics. Jung expressed this with a famous line, "The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution." And so, to understand the unconscious is to understand oneself, but also to understand humanity, to understand why we love, fear, dream, and suffer in such similar ways. The collective unconscious does not seek to dominate or destroy us. It seeks to complete us. And the path to wholeness always begins with facing what we fear to see. The more we reject our emotions, memories, and suppressed traits, the more forcefully the unconscious sends its signals. It pushes us to confront the truth of who we are. And if we dare to face it, a new psychological dawn begins to rise. Jung believed there is no coming to consciousness without pain, but he also believed that this pain is necessary, a quiet form of rebirth. If consciousness is the light, then the unconscious is the boundless sky behind that light. Not darkness, but vastness, where the parts of ourselves we lost long ago are waiting to be found again. And when these two layers connect, something miraculous happens. We begin to understand ourselves in ways we never have before. The great questions: who am I? What am I living for? Why do I repeat the same wounds? Start to become clear. For Jung, this is the deepest healing a human being can experience. And that is why he declared, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Only when we turn inward do we truly awaken, not from sleep, but from the unconscious patterns that have been guiding us without our awareness. Part 2. Psychic Energy. Libido. When we understand the unconscious as a living system, a hidden river flowing beneath the surface of awareness, the next step Jung wanted us to see is the source of energy moving through that river. If the unconscious is a kingdom, then libido is the life force that animates it. And to understand the human being, Jung believed, we must understand this current of psychic energy, for it is the force behind all our thoughts, emotions, choices, and even our mistakes. Freud viewed libido primarily as sexual energy. But Jung recognized that humans do not live by sexuality alone. Human beings create, love, dream, pray, doubt, destroy, rebuild, and are reborn. And behind all those movements lies a deeper form of energy. In Symbols of Transformation, Jung wrote clearly, libido is appetite in its natural state, a primal hunger for life, not merely sexual, but the raw fuel of existence of intellect, religion, art, emotion, aspiration, and even suffering. In other words, libido is life energy. When you love intensely, that is libido. When you create, write, sing, or pour yourself fully into an idea, that too is libido. When you rage, worry, or obsess, that is libido as well, energy that has become blocked or misdirected. For Jung, the question is never whether you have libido. The real question is, where is your libido flowing? Libido, the energy that self-regulates and seeks balance. Just as the unconscious seeks compensation for the imbalances of consciousness, libido operates by the same principle. When the conscious mind leans too heavily toward success, ambition, rationality, or control, the unconscious pushes back with opposite emotions: exhaustion, emptiness, anger, obsession, daydreaming, or strange dreams of being lost or disoriented. Libido wants balance. It refuses to let us live at one extreme while neglecting the other. Jung wrote in 2 essays on analytical psychology, "There is no energy without opposites. Energy is born from polarity. So is our psychological life. If you are too rational, libido pushes up emotion. If you are too extroverted, libido demands introversion. If you live entirely through the persona, libido awakens the shadow. If you abandon your dreams, libido signals you with inexplicable sadness. Libido is never silent. It is always speaking. We simply are not trained to listen. When energy gets stuck, the birth of complexes earlier. We saw that the unconscious is not a dead darkness, but a living ecosystem. So what happens when that ecosystem becomes obstructed? Jung taught that when libido cannot flow freely, cannot express itself through action, creativity, emotion, or honesty, it condenses into a psychological nucleus, a hotspot within the psyche. He called it a complex. A complex is not an enemy. It is a cluster of trapped psychic energy, unable to move outward into life, and so it becomes obsession, compulsion, or emotional overwhelm. And when a complex is activated, a person becomes unlike themselves. Jung described this in the structure and dynamics of the psyche. It is as if we were possessed by an autonomous being. When a complex speaks, we are no longer in full control. A part of the unconscious takes over. A casual remark can make you explode. A small gesture from someone wounds you more than it should. A relationship drags you into an old pattern you swore you'd escaped. An irrational fear stops you right at the edge of your breakthrough. This is not weakness. This is libido trapped, and it is asking you to open a door you have never dared to open. If you refuse to open it, the signals intensify pain, anxiety, self-sabotaging behavior, recurring nightmares, a growing sense of disconnection from yourself. Libido, the root of creativity and transformation. Yet Jung never saw libido as something destructive. He saw it as humanity's greatest creative force. In Symbols of Transformation, he wrote without energy, nothing happens in the psyche. Without libido, we cannot love, change, endure suffering, or create anything new. What is beautiful is this libido does not only destroy, it knows how to transform. It can condense into sorrow, then erupt into art. It can become trapped in a complex, then be released as insight. It can hide in a dream, then become a turning point in your life. Libido is the force that drives us into the process of individuation. When we ache from being stuck in a complex, that pain is an invitation from the unconscious. Look deeper, dig further, return the energy to where it belongs. Life energy and the journey back to the self. In Jung's view, healing is not about killing desire, suppressing emotions, or pretending to be calm. Healing begins when we allow our life energy to flow in its rightful direction, no longer trapped in old fear, drained through complexes, or fleeing from our own truth. When libido is released, we feel more creative, lighter, more authentic, more courageous, and most importantly, we begin to live according to the self, not the persona, not the shadow. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and to become yourself. You must allow your life energy to return to its true nature." If part 1 helped us understand the architecture of the unconscious, the hidden kingdom, then part 2 shows us the energy that moves that kingdom. A kingdom cannot live without its life force, and a human being cannot grow if libido is blocked. In the next part, we will explore psychological types, introversion, extraversion, and the 4 cognitive functions to see how this energy expresses itself in daily life. Why do some feel alive in crowds while others crave solitude? Why do some analyze everything while others move by intuition? And Jung believed all of this reflects one simple truth. They are different pathways through which life energy seeks balance. Part 3. Extraversion, introversion, and the 4 psychological functions. When we understand that libido is life energy, a hidden current pushing us toward creativity and transformation, Jung posed an essential question. In which direction will this current flow? Because energy is not only strength, it is also orientation. And to understand how a person will develop, we must know where their inner energy is directed. Jung called this the basic attitude of the psyche. The 2 fundamental directions, extraversion and introversion. It is here, at the bridge between part 2 and part 3, that we see the subtle insight Jung wanted us to grasp. Libido is not only strong or weak, it is also outward flowing or inward flowing. Thus, understanding life energy is not enough. We must understand how people direct that energy in their lives. This is the next step on the spiritual map Jung left behind. Extraversion, when energy flows toward the world. For the extraverted attitude, psychic energy flows outward toward people, events, activities, movement. They feel most alive when interacting, doing, speaking, participating in the social world. For them, The external world is the main stage of meaning. Jung described this type in Psychological Types. The extrovert's life is, as it were, transferred more or less completely into the object. They live in the object, taking the outer world as their anchor. They adapt easily, connect easily, and draw energy from the pulse of life around them. But extroversion is not merely liking social contact. It is a worldview, a way of understanding life through action, concrete facts, and direct experience. They learn by doing, by participating, by engaging with reality itself. Introversion, when energy turns inward. On the opposite side are the introverts. Their energy flows inward toward thoughts, emotions, reflection, intuition, and imagination. Their lives have two layers, one unfolding externally and another unfolding internally, and the internal layer is the one that matters most. Jung wrote, "The introvert is not governed by the object. He is dependent upon his subjective world. Crowds may drain them, but solitude ignites their inner fire. They find strength in depth, contemplation, and inner meaning. They are not resisting the world, they simply choose to live from within." Introversion is not shyness. It is the power of depth, the ability to hear the subtle voice beneath the surface of experience. The 4 psychological functions, 4 ways we perceive the world. But Jung did not stop at attitudes. He recognized that people differ not only in the direction of their energy, but also in how they process information. This is where the 4 functions arise. In Psychological Types, Jung declared, the functions are for sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling. 1. Sensation. What do I perceive? This is the function of the senses, of concrete reality. Sensation types see the world through details, data, and tangible facts. They believe what they can see, touch, measure, or verify. They build, execute, analyze, and prioritize the real. Jung wrote, "Sensation tells you that something exists." 2. Intuition, what is possible. Intuitive types care less about what exists and more about what could exist. They sense future patterns, invisible connections, latent meaning. Jung said, intuition tells you where something comes from and where it is going. 3. Thinking. What does this mean logically? Thinking evaluates things through logic, structure, principles, and coherence. They solve problems using reasoning, rules, and conceptual clarity. Jung wrote, thinking tells you what a thing is. 4. Feeling. What is this worth? Feeling is not emotion, it is a value system. Feeling types make decisions based on meaning, relationships, and human impact. Jung explained, feeling tells you what a thing is worth. Attitude, introversion, extroversion, plus function, psychological type. Here lies the subtlety, Jung emphasized. There are not merely 8 types, 4 functions, 2 attitudes as labels. There are 8 directions of energy orientation. Each person has 1 dominant function, 1 auxiliary function, and 2 inferior or neglected functions. These neglected functions become our psychological blind spots. For example, an extroverted sensation type may become too focused on practicality, ignoring depth. An introverted thinking type may become overly detached from emotion. An extroverted feeling type may lose themselves in pleasing others. An introverted intuitive type may drift into private fantasy and lose contact with reality. Jung never claimed any function is better. Each person follows a unique path for their life energy, and if they do not understand that path, they may believe they are wrong, different, or failing. When the dominant function becomes too dominant, the imbalance. Any function, when overly favored, creates psychological distortion. This returns us to Jung's principle from the discussion of libido. The unconscious always compensates. When consciousness leans too far in one direction, the unconscious pushes back from the opposite direction. Jung wrote, "The greater the emphasis on the conscious attitude, the more will the unconscious compensate with the opposite." Thus, a highly extroverted person will eventually face their inner depths. A deeply introverted person will be pulled back toward outer reality. A person dominated by thinking will be confronted with emotion. A feeling-dominant person will be forced to learn logic to stand firm. This is nature's way of restoring psychic balance, the meaning of the 8-type model in the journey of growth. Jung wanted us to understand one thing: personality is not a fixed box. Personality is the direction of psychic energy, and because energy always moves, personality can evolve. We are not born permanently introverted, thinking-based, or intuitive. We are born with tendencies and choices. We can expand our blind spots, develop our neglected functions, and become more whole. Jung believed that psychological maturity begins when we stop living solely from our dominant function and begin to observe the parts we have not yet developed. He called this individuation, the journey of becoming who we truly are. After understanding the unconscious, life energy, and the directions of psychic flow, Jung leads us deeper toward the internal characters, the complexes where energy becomes trapped and creates repeating patterns throughout our lives. That will be the doorway into the next part, where we finally meet the inner figures calling out to be heard. Part 4. Complexes, the inner characters living within us. Once we understand that a person is the intersection between the direction of their energy, introversion, extroversion, and the 4 psychological functions, we begin to notice something clearer, no matter which function we operate from. There are moments when we are no longer ourselves. Jung observed this countless times in therapy. A highly intelligent person suddenly becomes childish. A calm person erupts in uncontrollable anger. A strong person shrinks because of one small comment. And Jung asked the essential question: who is reacting for them? The answer is the complex. Here, we move naturally from part 3 into part 4. If attitudes and functions are how we process the world, then complexes are the inner characters that determine how we react to it. Without understanding complexes, we cannot understand the full spiritual map Jung left behind. Complexes, the hidden child. Characters in the inner world. Jung never described complexes as abstract concepts, but as living sub-personalities within the psyche. They have voices, emotions, memories, and sometimes their own purposes. In The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, Jung wrote, "Complexes behave like independent beings. A complex forms when an archetypal core merges with emotionally charged personal experiences. For example, a mother complex forms from the mother archetype, plus experiences of nurturing or control. A father complex forms from the father archetype, plus experiences of protection or authority. An abandonment complex arises from the child archetype plus memories of loss, hurt, or insecurity. At their essence, complexes are not bad. They are crystallized bundles of memory plus emotion plus belief that form an inner character, but they become dangerous when activated. When a complex wakes up, we are no longer ourselves. Jung discovered a profound truth. Complexes do not ask our permission. They appear on their own and react on their own, in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. He wrote, "We do not have complexes. They have us. This explains why we know we shouldn't be angry, yet we explode. We know we shouldn't be jealous, yet we lose control. We know a relationship is toxic, yet we return to it. We know we're repeating a mistake, yet something pushes us to continue." When a complex is triggered, it takes control of the psyche, pulling us into old patterns shaped by unhealed fear, wounds, and memories. One could say a complex is the invisible puppeteer. We think we are choosing, but it is the wounded part inside us choosing for us. Complexes in love, work, and everyday life in love. Complexes appear everywhere in relationships. Someone with an abandonment complex fears being left, so they cling too tightly or withdraw at the first sign of risk. Someone with a controlling mother complex may unconsciously choose partners who resemble their mother's emotional patterns. At work, someone with a judgmental father complex becomes obsessed with achievement, fearing failure as if it meant death. Someone with an inferiority complex always feels not good enough, even when highly competent. In the family, small sentences like, "You can do better," "Why aren't you like others?" "Don't be weak," over time, harden into psychological stone and become complexes. Complexes make us repeat old patterns, as if the past is still living inside the present. The goal is not to destroy the complex, but to recognize and dialogue with it. One of the most compassionate elements in Jung's psychology is that he never saw complexes as enemies. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, he wrote, "To destroy the complex is unnecessary. What is necessary is to dissolve the tension it creates. A complex is the abandoned child inside the soul. It becomes angry, clingy, terrified only because it wants to be seen. Every complex is a message. Come back and heal this part of you." Thus, Jung's path is not about fighting, but about recognition, knowing when a complex has been activated. Dialogue, listening to what it wants to say. Integration, returning its trapped energy to the main current of life. When integrated, a complex becomes a source of power. The mother complex can transform into deep compassion. The father complex can transform into strong leadership. The abandonment complex can transform into profound empathy for others' pain. What once wounded us, when understood correctly, can become our greatest source of creativity. Complexes and the individuation journey. Complexes are the inevitable checkpoints on the path of individuation. We cannot become ourselves if complexes are driving us. But we also cannot become ourselves if we run away from them. Jung believed complexes hold the key to our deepest memories. Complexes hold the life energy that has been trapped. Complexes hold the lessons we must learn in order to grow. Every person who has ever had a moment of inner awakening begins with the realization, "I cannot keep living this way." That moment is when a complex is finally seen, and the architecture of the psyche begins to change. After understanding complexes, the inner characters capable of steering our lives, Jung leads us even deeper into healing by confronting our internal opposites. For the psyche always contains two poles, reason and emotion, intuition and sensation, individuality and collectivity. And it is within the tension between these opposites that a new self is born. That is where Part 5 begins. Part 5. Individuation, the central journey of human life. Once we understand that within us exist inner child, characters, complexes that behave like autonomous psychic beings, we must confront an unavoidable truth. If we do not return to dialogue with ourselves, we will live our entire lives under the invisible control of the forgotten parts within us. And at this point, moving from Part 4 to Part 5, we step into the single most essential concept in all of Jungian psychology, individuation. If the unconscious is the structure, libido is the energy, typology is the direction of flow, and complexes are the inner characters, then individuation is the journey through which all those parts return into one unified whole. It is not the psychological technique, it is the fundamental process of living. Individuation, the journey back to your true nature, in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, individuation means becoming an individual. And insofar as individuality embraces our innermost last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. In other words, individuation is not about becoming a better version of someone else. It is the process of becoming irreplaceably yourself, the one and only person life has ever asked you to be. And this journey does not unfold through striving for success. It begins by facing the unconscious. Facing the unconscious, withdrawing projections, ending illusions. One of the first steps of individuation is withdrawing our projections. Jung wrote in Aion, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. We project our fears onto others, then resent them for reflecting those fears back. We project unlived desires onto others, then idealize them. We project unhealed wounds onto others, then convince ourselves the world is against us. Individuation begins when we pull back the light we have thrown outward and look at what is truly living in the mind within. When projections are withdrawn, the outer world becomes less dramatic, and the inner world begins to shine. Facing the shadow. Darkness is not the enemy. The shadow is the part of ourselves we have pushed out of the light, the anger we cannot admit, the vulnerability we refuse to show, the talent we are afraid to live, the passion we fear being judged for, the pain we keep trying to forget. In Aion, Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We cannot positive think our way into healing the shadow. We must look at it with unjudging eyes, and when we do, the shadow is no longer a monster, it becomes a guide, leading us toward authenticity, strength, and alignment. Meeting the anima animus, the bridge between consciousness and the unconscious. If the shadow is the first door, then anima and animus are the bridge between two worlds. In men, the anima is the inner feminine archetype emotion, intuition, openness. In women, The animus is the inner masculine archetype reason, will, spiritual strength. Jung called this the bridge of the soul. In the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, he wrote, "The anima is a personification of all feminine psychological tendencies within a man's psyche. Likewise, the animus personifies the masculine tendencies within a woman's psyche. If we do not make peace with these inner figures, we project them onto lovers and partners and love them through illusion instead of reality." Understanding the anima animus helps us become less emotionally dependent, reduce illusions in love, stop idealizing others, and build more mature relationships. Restructuring the relationship between ego and self, the heart of the journey. Individuation is not the killing of the ego. Jung never advocated destroying the self. He taught that the ego is simply the center of consciousness, while the self is the center of the entire psyche. The self is the deepest essence, the totality of conscious plus unconscious. In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung wrote, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the fullest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality." In other words, the ego is the one steering the boat. The self is the ocean. The ego must learn to listen to the self, rather than try to control everything. When this happens, people begin to feel aligned, no longer rowing against their own soul. Why does individuation often begin in midlife? Youth is the stage of building career, love, identity, family. But at some point, often in midlife, what once felt like success no longer feels like meaning. We begin to ask, who am I living for? What truly matters? Why do I still feel empty, even when I have everything? Jung observed this endlessly and wrote, "The greatest problems of life are never fully solved. They can only be outgrown." Midlife crisis is not collapse. It is metamorphosis. It is the moment the self calls us home. Individuation as the death and rebirth of the old self. This is why Jung compared individuation to a cycle of death and rebirth. Not the physical death, but the death of the parts we cling to, a persona that has grown too tight. Unhealed complexes, old fears, the image we want the world to see. When these old structures die, we begin to return to our true nature. In CW 9AD, Jung wrote, "In the individuation process, the individual is faced with the necessity of becoming conscious of his uniqueness. This is the moment when we stop living as others expect and begin living as the soul has always wanted. Individuation, the greatest gift you can give yourself." Reaching the later stages of this path, we become calmer, more authentic, more creative, more free, and more deeply connected to life. Individuation does not promise an easy life. It promises true one. This truth comes from uniting the unconscious and the conscious, the light and the shadow, the ego and the essence. And as soon as a person steps onto the path of individuation, they quickly realize that not only shadow, anima, animus, and ego must be understood, but deeper archetypes begin to appear. The self, the persona, the great father and great mother, the hero, the child, the trickster, the magician. These archetypal figures are the map the soul of humanity has passed down through thousands of years. This is the doorway into Part 6, the world of archetypes. Part 6, self, shadow, anima, animus, persona. and the central archetypes, the soul map. According to Carl Jung, when the journey of individuation begins, a person steps from the bright surface of consciousness into the twilight of the inner world, where deeper memories, archetypes, and symbolic figures have been shaping a life we once believed we were consciously directing. In the previous part, we walk through the death rebirth of the ego, the moment the ego must yield to the greater presence Jung called the self. And at exactly that threshold, Jung leads us into a vast forest of archetypes, where each inner figure plays a subtle role on the path of maturity. This is not merely psychological structure. This is the ancient map of the human soul, the self, the central archetype, where all paths converge. The self is the heart of Jung's entire system. It is the totality of consciousness and the unconscious, the highest image of wholeness a human being can evolve toward. Jung wrote in memories, dreams, reflections. The self is a unifying symbol which expresses the unity of the personality as a whole. The self is not merely the end point, it is the pull, the goal, and the calling. It appears in dreams as mandalas, circles, squares, or a sacred guiding figure. When the self awakens within us, we feel as though we are finally walking in the direction meant for our life, not performing roles, not living for others' expectations, but responding to the deepest invitation of our being. The self is where the two dissolve, consciousness and unconsciousness, light and shadow, ego and soul, all become one. The shadow, the rejected darkness that holds the keys to freedom. Before meeting the self, we must always face the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is the part of us hidden because it did not fit our persona or society's expectations. In Aion, Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The shadow contains repressed anger, unlived passion, forgotten talent, unspoken pain, truths we fear confronting. The shadow often appears through projection. What we despise most fiercely in others is often what we refuse to see in ourselves. But when we embrace the shadow, something extraordinary happens. We judge less, defend less, feel less tension, and become more authentic." Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We cannot become brighter without walking through the dark. The shadow is the doorway to the self." Anima and animus, the sacred bridge between two worlds. The anima is the inner feminine in the soul of a man. The animus is the inner masculine in the soul of a woman. They are powerful archetypes, the channels through which the unconscious speaks. Jung wrote in the Archetypes and the collective unconscious, the anima is the archetype of life itself, and of the animus. The animus is the deposit, as it were, of all woman's ancestral experiences of man. When anima animus is not recognized, we project them onto lovers, idealizing them, placing unrealistic expectations, becoming disappointed, and assigning blame. Love becomes a battlefield of illusions. But when we withdraw projections and face anima animus within ourselves, we no longer love through fantasy, we love through truth, emotional maturity, and spiritual depth. The persona, a beautiful mask that cannot live life for us. The persona is our social mask, the perfect employee, the ideal parent, the kind person, the strong one. But if we identify with the persona, we lose our true inner life. Jung warned in 2 essays on analytical psychology. The persona is a complicated system of relations between the individual consciousness and society. The persona is necessary for social life, but dangerous if we mistake it for our authentic self. When the persona cracks, as it often does in midlife, we begin to hear the call of the self. The father-mother archetypes, ancient patterns that shape how we love and how we fear. The archetypes of the father and mother carry enormous influence. They lie deeper than the real parents of our childhood. The mother has 2 faces: the nurturing mother warmth, protection; the devouring mother control, absorption of identity. The father also has 2 faces: the guiding father direction, authority, courage; the tyrannical father oppression, rigidity. Jung wrote CW9I. The mother-child relationship is the archetypal basis of the whole psyche. What remains unresolved with these primal archetypes becomes repeating patterns in love, power, work, and in how we eventually become parents ourselves. The hero, the figure of transcending the old self. Across all cultures, the hero leaves home, faces trials, battles monsters, and returns transformed. Jung understood this as the symbolic pattern of individuation. In Symbols of Transformation, he wrote, "The hero myth is the most common and most important myth of man's psychic journey. We become the hero whenever we dare to step out of our comfort zone in search of real meaning. The divine child, the potential for spiritual rebirth. The divine child symbolizes new beginnings, hope, and renewal. It is both fragile and sacred. Whenever a part of us begins to revive after crisis, loss, or darkness, that is the child archetype awakening in our life. The trickster and the magician, the twin powers of inner disruption and inner creation. The trickster embodies creative chaos. It breaks rules, exposes illusions, and bends structures we once assumed were absolute. Unconscious trickster energy leads to destruction. Integrated trickster energy becomes humor, flexibility, and insight. The magician embodies knowledge, transformation, and initiation. It is the archetype of the alchemist, healer, and visionary. When these 2 archetypes are balanced, we can create, innovate, break old patterns without being pulled into chaos. All archetypes meet in the self, the final point of the inner journey. Each archetype is a doorway. The self is the temple at the center. To awaken the self, we must face the shadow, engage the anima animus, remove the persona, heal the father-mother patterns, walk the path of the hero, protect the inner child, and balance trickster and magician. Jung wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious." This means development is not only inward, it expands outward into every part of life. After journeying through the world of archetypes, the map of the soul, Jung leads us to an even deeper principle, the tension of opposites, where every pair of psychic polarities, reason, emotion, intuition, sensation, masculine, feminine, individual, collective demands, reconciliation. And it is within that tension that a new human being is born. This is the foundation of the next part, reconciling the opposites, the transcendent function. Part 7, the stages of life and the midlife crisis, the gateway into the deeper layers of the spirit. When we understand how the archetypes operate from the self to the shadow, from the persona to the anima animus, from the hero to the child, we begin to recognize an essential truth. These archetypes do not rise randomly. They appear according to the rhythm of life itself, as though life contains its own chapters, and each chapter awakens a different part of the soul. And at exactly this turning point, from part 6 to part 7, Jung leads us toward a deeper discovery. A human being does not live one continuous line, but two distinct halves, each with a different task of the soul. The first half of life, the stage of building the ego. Jung observed that the first half of life from youth into midlife carries a completely different mission than the second half. In the structure and dynamics of the psyche, he wrote, "The first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it. In the first half, life demands that we build an ego, create a career, form a family, establish our place in society, prove our competence, and cling to outward goals. This is the stage where the persona must be strong, the social mask that helps us adapt, work, compete, and move upward. In the first half, the persona is a survival tool. It is necessary for building a life on the outer plane. But the persona is not the whole person. It is only the surface. At a certain point, what we have built no longer creates meaning. The midlife crisis, when the soul demands its voice. Back. The second half of life begins as a person enters midlife, usually between 35 and 50. This is the stage Jung believed the unconscious begins knocking louder, because it knows the soul must live itself fully before the physical life reaches its end. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung wrote, thoroughly unprepared. We take the step into the second half of life, but we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. We cannot continue living the second half by the rules of the first. The midlife crisis is not a collapse. It is the pivot of the soul. Why does crisis arise? Because outer achievement, status, money, reputation suddenly feel empty. Forgotten dreams return. The persona becomes too tight, like an old coat that no longer fits. Unresolved shadow material begins to react. Old complexes push to be healed. During this period, people often feel emptiness even when they have it all. Fatigue without clear reason, loss of inspiration, confusion about purpose, awareness that old patterns no longer fit, or an unexpected desire to change their entire life. This is not failure. This is the unconscious calling us back inward. The second half of life, the stage of meaning, truth, and preparation for death. If the first half of life moves outward, the second half is a journey inward. Jung described this in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. In the second half of life, the emphasis shifts from doing to being. People begin to care less about competition and more about meaning, value, spiritual contentment, reconciliation with the past, inner maturity, acceptance of limits. This is the stage when the soul demands to be lived authentically, no longer run by persona, no longer driven by shadow, no longer hijacked by complexes, but guided by the self. The fear of death. The midlife crisis often comes with an awareness of death. But Jung never saw death as an ending. He saw it as a shift of energy. In memories, dreams, reflections, he wrote, "The unconscious wants to live and grow, even if the ego is terrified of change." Facing death does not make us pessimistic. It makes us awake. We realize we do not want to live the rest of our life as a shadow of ourselves. The midlife crisis is an invitation of the soul. Crisis is not a breakdown. It is the self calling. It asks us, who is it that you truly want to become? Which voice inside you has never been heard? What part of your childhood did you abandon? Which dream did you give up because you thought you weren't enough? Jung said, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." And this acceptance marks the beginning of a new half of life. The midlife crisis invites us to confront the shadow, the anima animus, unhealed complexes, an exhausted persona, forgotten dreams, and the truth of who we are. And when we face these things, something is released, a new energy, a new calm, a new truth about ourselves. Midlife crisis and individuation. Two sides of the same process. Individuation cannot happen if a person does not pass through the midlife crisis. If the outer life continues to distract us, we never dare to look inward. The midlife crisis is the moment the unconscious says, "It is time. Time to face the shadow. Time to withdraw projections. Time to meet the inner child. Time to release the persona. Time to listen to the self." This is why the midlife crisis is so profound. It is the gateway of transformation. If understood correctly, the midlife crisis is a gift. Jung viewed crisis as a natural part of human maturation, just as winter is an essential part of nature's cycle. In CW8 he wrote, "What youth found and must find in the morning of life, older age must find again in its own way." We do not lose ourselves, we prepare to rediscover ourselves in a deeper, more mature, more authentic way. The midlife crisis is the moment a person stops being driven by life and begins being led by the soul. And once a person moves through the midlife crisis, they become more sensitive to the subtle signals of the unconscious, especially dreams, symbolic messages, and the process of active imagination. This is the doorway Jung opens in the next part: dreams, dream interpretation, and active imagination, the deepest language through which the soul speaks to us. Part 8: Reconciling the opposites, the transcendent function. After a person walks through the midlife crisis, the moment when the weight of life forces them to stop clinging to the old and return to the inner world, something deeper becomes visible. The human soul is not a flat surface, but a structure made of opposites. And it is precisely the tension between these opposites that creates transformation. In Part 7, we saw the first half of life seeks external success. The second half seeks inner meaning. And when life shifts from doing to being, from persona to self, a person must learn the hardest lesson of all: how to reconcile two poles that appear impossible to unite. This is where Jung introduces one of his most important ideas: the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism through which a new synthesis appears when two opposites are held in consciousness long enough without negating each other. Human beings always live between opposites. Jung observed that the inner life is always made of polarities: consciousness, unconsciousness, thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition, masculine, feminine, individual, collective, freedom, responsibility, stability, change, what the ego wants, what the soul needs. These opposites do not exist to destroy each other. They exist to keep us psychologically alive. In Psychological Types, Jung wrote, "There is no energy without opposites. Psychic energy exists only when two poles pull against each other. If one pole disappears, the energy collapses and the inner life becomes stagnant." Human beings do not suffer because they have opposites. They suffer because they try to deny one side. Psychological health comes not from denial, but from integration. Many believe that peace comes from eliminating one side, becoming purely rational, or purely emotional, or purely intuitive, or purely factual, or living only for oneself, or living only for family or society. But Jung said the opposite. In The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, he wrote, "The tension of the opposites creates a new level of being. This new level does not come from choosing one pole, but from embracing both. When two opposites are allowed to coexist in consciousness, a new, deeper, more mature perspective arises. This is the transcendent function, holding the tension between opposites, the act of a mature soul. Holding tension does not mean confusion, conflict, or inner chaos. It means not running away, not suppressing, not denying, not choosing prematurely. It means I have rationality, but I also have emotion. I have a strong masculine side, but also a gentle feminine side. I need the outer world, but I also need inner time. I must build a career, but I must also find meaning. I have a persona for society, but a self that must be honored. By holding both without erasing either, we create a psychological space where a new synthesis appears, a third thing, a symbolic inner child of both poles. The transcendent function, when two opposites unite into a new level of consciousness. Tension between opposites is not a dead end. It is the energy of transformation. Jung wrote in CW8, "The transcendent function arises from the union of conscious and unconscious contents," meaning a new synthesis appears when conscious content and unconscious content are held side by side without rejecting each other. Examples: when thinking and feeling coexist, we gain emotional intelligence. When sensation and intuition work together, we gain holistic perception. When the masculine and feminine within us harmonize, we gain spiritual maturity. When ego and self align, we gain the right path for our life. This is why Jung believed that the mature person is not the one without opposites, but the one strong enough to hold them. Examples of reconciling opposites in daily life. Thinking and feeling. A purely rational person becomes cold. A purely emotional person becomes unstable. Maturity is the ability to feel deeply and then guide those feelings with conscious understanding. 2. Sensation and intuition. Sensation shows us reality. Intuition shows us possibility. Together, they allow us not only to live in the present, but also to see ahead. 3. Masculine and feminine within. Anima, animus. A man disconnected from his anima becomes rigid or easily manipulated by emotion. A woman disconnected from her animus may become overly dependent or excessively hardened. When these archetypes integrate, we gain inner balance and mature love. 4. Individual and collective. We are responsible for ourselves, but also responsible to the community. Balancing these is the art of living. Why reconciliation of opposites is the essence of spiritual development. Because every psychological conflict originates from inner division, and every psychological healing begins when we accept both sides. In Aion, Jung wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. We cannot become whole by amputating any part of ourselves, even the parts we judge as weak, dark, or wrong. Wholeness occurs only through integration. The transcendent function is the mechanism that makes this possible. Tension is not the enemy, it is the liturgy of the soul. People often fear inner conflict, but Jung saw conflict as necessary for the soul's growth. In CW 14 he wrote, "The greater the tension, the greater the potential. We do not suffer because we have conflict. We suffer because we flee from conflict. And when we stop running, when we hold the tension and bring both poles into consciousness, a new truth emerges. And when a person learns to hold the tension of their inner opposites, they begin to hear the unconscious more clearly, especially through dreams, symbolic images, and the process of active imagination." Jung believed dreams are not random. They are the soul's deepest language. And this leads us into the next part: dreams, dream analysis, and active imagination, the inner voice of the soul. Part 9. Dreams, dream analysis, and active imagination, the secret language of the soul. When a person learns to stand firmly within the tension of opposites between reason and emotion, unconscious and conscious, intuition and senses, a new doorway begins to open. It is the moment when the soul becomes more sensitive, and the unconscious can finally speak in its own language. As Jung wrote, the unconscious communicates through symbols. CW9I. And where do symbols appear most vividly in dreams? The transition from Part 8 to Part 9 is a natural step after learning how to hold the tension of opposites. A person becomes spacious enough to hear the messages of the unconscious, and dreams are its most powerful and honest channel. Dreams, the unconscious, speaking in its most honest voice. Freud saw dreams as the disguised fulfillment of repressed wishes. Jung looked deeper. He believed dreams were not merely hidden desires, but the compensatory voice of the unconscious, always trying to correct and balance our conscious attitude. In The Meaning of Psychology, Jung wrote, "Dreams are the guiding words of the soul. Dreams are guidance. They are adjustment. They are the map the unconscious lifts up when the conscious mind drifts away from center." What do dreams compensate? When we are too rational, dreams deliver emotion. When we cling too tightly to persona, dreams reveal the shadow. When we lose direction, dreams offer symbolic guidance. When we try to control everything, dreams show fragmentation. When we are bound by a complex, dreams speak for the wounded part. Dreams express what we cannot say in daylight. Dreams show what we refuse to see. Dreams reveal the parts of ourselves we have abandoned. Jung described this beautifully In CW8, the dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul. Dreams are the secret doorway into the heart of the soul. Jungian dream interpretation, expanding symbols through myth, religion, culture. Jung differed from Freud not only in his view of dreams, but also in his method of interpreting them. Freud interpreted dreams through personal history. Jung interpreted dreams through the deeper history of humanity. He believed dream symbols did not belong only to the personal unconscious, but to the collective memory of humankind. Therefore, to understand dreams, we must cast the light wider. Jung called this method amplification, comparing dream symbols with mythology, with ancient religion, with primal rituals, with cultural motifs, with archetypes across history. In Man and His Symbols, Jung wrote, "Amplification is the process of comparing dream images with motifs from myths, fairy tales, and religious symbolism. Through amplification, we begin to see the snake in a dream is not just a snake, it is the archetype of rebirth. The ocean is not just water, it is the collective unconscious. A house is not just a building, it is the structure of the psyche. The stranger is not just a stranger, it is the shadow, or an unrealized potential within us." Amplification turns dream fragments into a symbolic map, revealing what the soul is trying to say. Active imagination. Direct dialogue with the unconscious. If dreams are the unconscious speaking when we sleep, then active imagination is the unconscious speaking while we are awake and we speak back. This is one of Jung's most unique and powerful contributions. Active imagination is the method Jung developed when he entered his own psychological crisis in 1913, the period that produced the Red Book. It allows one to consciously step into the symbolic world and engage in dialogue with inner images. In the Red Book, Jung wrote, "Sit quietly, and then begin to let your fantasy images emerge. Do not censor them, just observe." Active imagination means inviting the dream image to return, observing it, asking what it wants, letting it speak in its own language, and participating in the dialogue. It is like a conscious inner theater, where we may meet the shadow, the anima animus, the complex, or other archetypal figures. Jung emphasized that this was not hallucination or meaningless fantasy. It is the deepest form of psychological work, where the unconscious and conscious meet in a neutral space. Active imagination, a path of healing, creativity, and inner reorganization. When we enter active imagination, we are doing three things at once. Releasing energy stuck in complexes. Frozen memories and emotions come alive and begin to transform. 2. Dialoguing with the shadow and integrating it. We no longer fear the shadow, we understand it and befriend it. 3. Bringing unconscious and conscious closer together. This is the foundation of the transcendent function, the creation of a new synthesis. In active imagination, a person becomes the character, the director, and the witness of their own inner journey. Jung wrote in CW8, "Active imagination is the psychological mechanism that unites the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche. This level of healing cannot be reached by logical advice or intellectual analysis alone." Dreams and active imagination. Two hands of the same soul. Dreams are the unconscious approaching us. Active imagination is us approaching the unconscious. One occurs at night, one occurs in the day. Together, they form two halves of the same equation, the journey back to the self. Dreams do not speak in words, they speak in images. Dreams never say, "Do this." Dreams show us images, the oldest language of the soul. Jung wrote in C.W. Nye, "The dream is the theater in which the dreamer is himself the scene, the actor, the prompter, and the producer. In dreams, we are everything. And because we create the dream never lies." When we learn to decode dreams and engage the unconscious through active imagination, we begin a deeper journey, the journey of healing through art, creativity, expression, and most importantly, through the transformative relationship between therapist and patient. This opens the doorway to the next section, Jungian psychotherapy, word association, art, and the sacred transformation through the healing relationship. Part 10. Jungian psychotherapy, word association, art, and the healing relationship. When a person learns to listen to the unconscious through dreams, symbols, and active imagination, they enter a new phase of the inner journey, the phase of conscious healing. The transition from Part 9 to Part 10 happens naturally. Dreams give us images. Active imagination gives us dialogue. But to transform this understanding into real healing, a person needs a space to express, release, and reorganize the inner world. And Jung developed 3 gateways that lead directly to this healing word: association, creative expression, art, the therapeutic relationship. These 3 methods are not separate. They are 3 layers of the same structure. Layer 1, discovering the unconscious through language. Layer 2, expressing the unconscious through creativity. Layer 3, transforming the unconscious through human relationship. Only when all 3 layers converge does healing become whole. 1. Word association, proof that the unconscious has structure. Before Jung became the architect of deep analytical psychology, he was an experimental researcher. At the Burghölzli Hospital in Zurich, Jung conducted one of the most famous experiments in modern psychology, the word association test. And the results revealed something revolutionary, something that changed 20th century psychology. The unconscious is not chaos. It has structure. Jung noticed that when he read a word such as mother, love, fear, betrayal, or child, if that word touched a complex, the patient would react more slowly, respond evasively, make mistakes, repeat nonsense words, or answer emotionally instead of logically. In other words, the complex revealed itself by disrupting language. In CW3, Jung wrote, "The complex interferes with the will and disturbs the conscious performance." This revealed a profound truth. We do not simply carry old wounds. We carry unconscious knots that continue to shape our lives, and word association was the first tool Jung used to touch the unconscious directly, without dreams or long analysis. It was a window into the fragments that had never been healed. 2. Art, the natural language of the unconscious. Jung realized that the unconscious does not speak only through words. It speaks through images, colors, movement, story, rhythm, the primordial languages of the soul. In the Red Book, Jung wrote, "Art is the kind of language that the unconscious prefers." That is why he encouraged patients to use creative expression, drawing mandalas, painting the shadow, sculpting, journaling, writing dialogues with dream figures, enactments, sand play, modeling clay, free movement and expressive arts. Not to create beautiful art, but to let the unconscious express itself. Jung drew a sharp distinction. Creativity in therapy is not for decoration, it is for liberation. In CW13 he wrote, "To give form to the images that arise from the unconscious is the essential task. The images that come from the unconscious must be brought into form so we can see them, converse with them, and integrate them." Why is art essential in therapy? Because words are limited by logic. Our deepest wounds are stored in emotion, not language. Images can reach places reason cannot enter. Drawings, symbols, movement, and sculpture help a complex take shape so it can begin to release and transform. Art is light entering the places where the shadow hides not through logic, but through the soul's natural expression. 3. The therapeutic relationship, the sacred relationship that transforms two souls. If word association is the window and art is the language, then the therapeutic relationship is the sacred space where transformation actually happens. Jung rejected the idea that the therapist stands above the patient as the one who knows more. On the contrary, he wrote in CW16, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." A therapeutic relationship is not one-sided. It is the encounter of two souls, and if the meeting is genuine, both are changed. Transference. The patient projects onto the therapist feelings, expectations, wounds that originally belonged to parents, lovers, or people who once hurt them. Counter-transference. The therapist also responds sometimes from their own unconscious patterns. Jung believed this is not a flaw, but an opportunity for healing. Within the therapeutic space, both must face projections, complexes, old wounds, expectations, fear, the shadow, and archetypal images in one another. The therapist does not heal the patient. The relationship heals the patient. Jung wrote in letters, "It is not the doctor who cures, but the self-healing powers of the patient. The therapist provides the mirror. The unconscious heals itself." The integration of all three. Jung's unique healing system. Word association gives us diagnosis. Creative expression gives us expression. The therapeutic relationship gives us transformation. These are the three pillars of Jungian healing. Understanding the unconscious through word association. 2. Expressing the unconscious through creative art. 3. Reorganizing the unconscious through the healing relationship. Unlike many schools of psychology that focus only on symptoms, Jung focused on the soul. He did not teach patients to think positive. He helped them become their true selves. In Modern Man, in Search of a Soul, he wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no universal recipe for living." Jungian therapy does not give advice. It gives the ability to understand oneself. And that ability is the doorway to healing. After a person moves through therapy, confronting complexes, expressing the unconscious, reorganizing inner relationships. They become more sensitive to the mysterious coincidences that appear in life, outer events that reflect inner states. This is where Jung opened one of his most bold and beautiful ideas: synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. The theme of the next chapter. Part 11. Synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. When the outer world reflects the inner soul. After a person has passed through the therapeutic journey facing their complexes, expressing the unconscious through art, and experiencing transformation in the healing relationship, they become far more sensitive to the subtle movements of life. Things they once dismissed as random, accidental, or mere coincidence suddenly take on a different hue, a depth, a pattern, a meaning. From Part 10 to Part 11. The dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious has grown strong enough that a person begins to notice the language of the outer world, a language that does not speak in words or dream images, but speaks through strange events. This is where Jung introduced one of his boldest ideas: synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. What is synchronicity? In synchronicity, an causal connecting principle. Jung defined synchronicity is the coincidence of events that are meaningfully related, but not causally connected. In other words, an outer event coincides exactly with an inner state, even though the two have no causal relationship yet for the person experiencing it. It carries deep significance. Put simply, the material world is speaking in the language of the soul. Examples of synchronicity. You think intensely about an old friend, and they call at that exact moment. You struggle with a difficult decision, then stumble upon the exact sentence you needed to read. A dream foreshadows an event that later unfolds in real life. A symbol appears repeatedly in your daily life, as if someone is trying to send a message. You are lost or confused, and a chance event opens the right direction. Synchronicity is not magic. It is the language of a deeper order moving beneath the surface of life. Synchronicity as the bridge between psyche and matter. Jung believed the world is not split into two separate realms, the spiritual and the material. He argued that both are two aspects of the same underlying reality. In CW8 he wrote, "Psyche and matter are two different aspects of one and the same thing." If psyche and matter are two sides of the same coin, then synchronicity is the moment that coin spins and reveals its other face, allowing us to see that what moves within us and what unfolds outside us are not as distant as they appear. This was a bold step, one that even modern science is still trying to catch up with. Synchronicity appears when the unconscious and conscious overlap. Synchronicity does not occur when the inner world is chaotic, divided, or dominated by complexes. It appears when a person has faced their shadow, understood their complexes, expressed the unconscious through creativity, and experienced honesty and transformation in the therapeutic relationship. It appears when the two halves of the psyche, light and shadow, consciousness and unconscious, stand close together. At that moment, the outer world no longer looks chaotic, but begins to reflect the inner world with subtle precision. Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Synchronicities often accompany the process of individuation, meaning. These meaningful coincidences tend to arise when a person is on the path of individuation, when they are reconnecting with their deepest self. Synchronicity as a reminder. Something larger is at work. Jung never equated synchronicity with superstition. He viewed it as a form of spiritual awareness, the ability to perceive a deeper interconnectedness between oneself and the outer world. In Siba Nine Yami, Jung wrote, "Synchronicity takes the coincidence of events in space and time as meaning something more than mere chance." Synchronicity does not say that everything has a mystical cause. It says that not all coincidences are meaningless. For Jung, synchronicity strengthens what he called the religious attitude, not in the doctrinal sense, but in the sense of knowing that larger forces are at work, that there is order beneath apparent chaos, that meaning exists even when we do not yet understand it, that guidance flows beneath the surface of life. This is not blind faith. It is the sensitivity of a mature soul. Synchronicity and physics. Jung's collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli. Few people know that Jung developed synchronicity alongside Nobel Prize-winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Pauli studied quantum physics, a domain where particles can exist in two places at once, influence each other without touching, and behave in ways that defy classical cause and effect. Pauli showed Jung that the material world is not merely solid particles. It contains causal connections remarkably similar to the way the unconscious works. Jung realized synchronicity did not contradict science. It expanded science. Synchronicity happens when the soul is ready to change. Synchronicity is not a sign that we should abandon thinking, cling to mysticism, or chase omens. Synchronicity is the signal of inner transformation, when we are ready to release the old, when we have faced the shadow, when we are no longer ruled by complexes, when we have opened ourselves to the self, when we step into the deeper stages of individuation. Then the world begins to respond as if an invisible hand is opening paths before us. Synchronicity as the soul's compass. Jung believed synchronicity could help guide a person, not to predict the future, but to sense the direction that is right, the direction aligned with the self. In CW8, Jung wrote, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. Synchronicity is always there, but only those who are open, who have the third eye of spiritual intuition, can perceive it." Synchronicity, when life does not just unfold, it speaks back. When synchronicity appears, a person feels as if something is guiding them, as if the world has become more intelligible, as if they are not alone, as if life and the soul are beginning to share a dialogue. Synchronicity does not make life easier. It makes life deeper. Jung believed synchronicity is proof that the soul and the universe are not separate. And when a person recognizes this profound connection between psyche and world, they begin to see symbols everywhere in culture, religion, mythology, and human history. This is what led Jung into one of his final and greatest fields of study: collective symbolism. Alchemy, mythology, and the universal symbolic language of humankind, the theme of Part 12. Part 12. Alchemy, religion, myth, and collective symbols. The primitive language of the soul. When a person begins to notice synchronicity in their life, meaningful coincidences, recurring symbols that feel like invisible reminders, a new doorway opens the doorway into the collective memory of humanity. from Part 11 to Part 12. This movement unfolds naturally. Synchronicity gives us the sense that the world is not pure chaos, but shaped by a hidden order. And Jung realized that this hidden order had already been described long ago, not through science, but through mythology, religion, alchemy, folk tales, and the shared symbolic systems of humankind. Jung once wrote in Jungian, myths are the earliest form of science, and they are also a science of the soul. To understand the collective unconscious, Jung did not search in laboratories. He searched in ancient texts, in primordial rituals, in religious traditions, in alchemical manuscripts, in mythological symbols, and in the collective memory of thousands of years. He believed that if the personal unconscious speaks in dreams, then the collective unconscious speaks in myths. Alchemy, the secret language of individuation. Jung devoted more than 20 years to the study of alchemy, not because he believed that the ancients could literally turn lead into gold, but because he realized that the true alchemists were describing an inner transformation. In Psychology and Alchemy, Jung wrote, "The alchemical quest was not for material gold, but for the transformation of the human soul. Alchemy is a metaphor for the journey of individuation. Its three major stages mirror the three major phases of psychological transformation: nigredo, black collapse, chaos, shadow. Nigredo symbolizes the moment when darkness descends crisis, the collapse of old beliefs, the disintegration of the persona, confrontation with the shadow, the realization of the meaninglessness of the old ego. It is the dark night of the soul, and also the beginning of rebirth. Jung described it in CW 14, in the Nigredo. The soul enters the dark night. 2. Albedo, white purification, illumination, healing. Albedo is the phase of healing. The unconscious is illuminated. Complexes are dissolved. The shadow is integrated. The soul is washed clean of illusions about the ego. It is a gentle light, not the blinding one. The light of honest awareness. 3. Rubedo, red union, the rise of the self. Rubedo is the culmination of the process ego and unconscious are united. Inner and outer reality come into harmony. The self emerges as the new center. The person reaches spiritual maturity. Rubedo is the inner gold. Alchemy is the ancient language of individuation, encoded in symbols, images, colors, and rituals left behind by those who walk this inner path. In CW 13, Jung wrote about the power of alchemical symbolism. The alchemists found the treasure that is hard to reach and harder to understand. Religion and myth, the psychological maps of humanity. If alchemy is the process, then religion and myth are the maps. They contain archetypes that operate not only within individuals, but within all of humanity, in man and his symbols. Jung wrote, religions are systems of healing for psychic illness. Religion is not just a belief system. It is a collective language that helps humans find meaning, guidance, and comfort when confronting the great opposites of life. Myths serve the same function. Jung believed myths are the collective dreams of humanity, where each story expresses primordial psychological patterns. Prometheus and the fire equals intelligence and sacrifice. Persephone's descent into the underworld equals death and rebirth. Orpheus and Eurydice equal love and loss. The hero's journey equals individuation. In CW5, Jung affirmed, myths are first and foremost psychic phenomena, meaning myths do not merely tell stories, they describe the movements of the soul. Fairy tales, the whisper of the collective unconscious. Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz studied thousands of fairy tales and discovered that while their structure is simpler than myths, their archetypes are often purer. Fairy tales function like miniature models of the psyche. The witch equals the mother's shadow. The prince equals the self. The princess equals the anima. The forest equals the unconscious. The demon equals the rejected parts. The hidden treasure equals unrealized potential. The road equals the process of individuation. In the interpretation of fairy tales, Jung wrote, fairy tales are the purest and simplest expressions of collective unconscious processes, collective symbols, the language that helps us feel. We belong in a modern world that is fast-paced and materialistic. People have become cut off from symbols. Jung called this symbolic poverty Sneo Oi Biu Tiang. In CW18 he wrote, the lack of symbolic life is the cause of many modern neuroses. When people lose symbols, they lose the depth of the soul, the capacity for self-healing, connection with culture, a sense of belonging, the sense that life is meaningful. And so arise feelings of emptiness, boredom, meaninglessness, disorientation. Symbols are not just images. They are channels of communication between consciousness and the unconscious. Without symbols, the soul feels cut off from its source. They are symbols so important because they help us. 1. Place ourselves in the stream of humanity. We see that what we are going through is not new, but part of a pattern that humans have lived for thousands of years. 2. Understand ourselves through images rather than theory. Symbols bypass the intellect and go straight to emotion, where true healing occurs. 3. Connect with the self. The self always speaks in symbols, in dreams, in synchronicities, in creative work. 4. Regenerate meaning. Meaning does not come from logic. Meaning arises through symbol. Symbols are the bridge between the finite and the infinite. Like a lantern at the end of the road. Jung understood that in order for modern human beings not to lose themselves, they must return to symbolic language, the language that has nourished the human soul for millennia. In CW9I, he wrote, man cannot stand a meaningless life. Symbols are the small but steady light that allows us to keep walking, even when we no longer have a clear map. And so, when a person has traveled the entire Jungian path, from the personal unconscious to the collective unconscious, from complexes to the shadow, from anima animus to the self, from dreams to active imagination, from therapy to synchronicity, and finally into the treasury of human symbols, they touch what Jung regarded as the highest level of spiritual life, the capacity to live in a world filled with meaning, where every image, every encounter, every dream feels like a fragment of a larger map. If you feel the value and depth of this journey, leave a like as a way of sending us a wave of positive energy. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can continue traveling with us through the next spiritual adventures, where every dream, every reflection, and every breath is a doorway into your inner world. because to understand Jung is not only to understand psychology, it is to understand the very soul of humanity.